The command shattered the quiet midnight air like a slap across the face. "Get on the ground now." Hands where I can see them. Red and blue lights exploded across the long driveway of the big brick mansion in Willow Grove Estates. That fancy suburb just outside Atlanta, where the lawns are perfect and the neighbors wave but never really talk. A sleek black Tesla Model S sat halfway up the drive, its door half open, and the man stepping out looked like he'd just come from a black tie dinner. Tall, gray at the temples, salt and pepper beard trimmed neat. Wearing a crisp tuxedo with the bow tie already loosened, he froze, one polished shoe on the concrete, the other still inside the car, staring straight into the blinding flashlight. "Hey folks, it's your old friend here." Retired civil rights attorney who spent 35 years in courtrooms fighting the exact kind of mess you're about to hear. Can you picture it? A man who spent the whole day up on the Georgia Supreme Court bench, signing rulings that affect millions of people, gets treated like a car thief in his own driveway. Brothers, if you've ever felt that cold knot in your stomach when those lights hit your rearview mirror, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, down in Birmingham, or up in Detroit? Let me know, because stories like this hit different when we're all in it together. Let me set the scene for you the way I always do, plain and simple. The man behind the wheel that night was Justice Jamal Kingston, 58 years old, the first black justice ever appointed to the Georgia Supreme Court. Folks around the state called him the steady hand, the one who remembered what it was like growing up in a small town where the cops sometimes looked at you twice just for breathing. He'd spent the evening at a charity gala downtown, raising money for families who lost loved ones to police misconduct. The cruel kind of irony that makes your chest tight if you think about it too long. He was tired, sure, but proud. The speeches had gone well, checks had been written, and now he just wanted to get home to Elaine and their 17-year-old son, Marcus, kick off these dress shoes, and maybe have a quiet glass of sweet tea on the back porch. Justice Kingston eased the Tesla up the winding drive the same way he always did. Slow. Aren't you careful? Signaling every turn like the law-abiding man he was. The car was his one little splurge after 20 years on the bench, paid for with book royalties. Nothing flashy, just reliable. He'd been thinking about the cases waiting for him tomorrow when those lights suddenly filled his mirrors. He didn't panic. He'd seen too much in his life to panic. But his heart still gave that familiar thud, the one every black man over 40 knows too well. Now let me talk to you like the old lawyer I am. This right here, folks, is where the Fourth Amendment is supposed to kick in. That's the part of the Constitution that says cops can't just stop you or search you because they feel like it. They need what we call reasonable suspicion, something real, not just a hunch or the color of your skin or the fact that it's late and you're in a nice neighborhood. Ignore that rule, and you're looking at a false arrest lawsuit that can cost a city hundreds of thousands of dollars before lunch. I've settled cases like that. Brothers, watch departments write big checks because some young officer decided the math didn't add up. Black man plus nice car plus nighttime equals criminal. And let me tell you, that kind of thinking doesn't just hurt feelings. It can wreck lives. But we'll get to that. The officer who flipped on those lights was 27-year-old Ryan Caldwell. Buzz cut so tight you could see his scalp, shoulders squared like he was still trying to prove something. He'd transferred from the busy Atlanta precinct 6 months earlier, chasing quieter nights and better pay. Thing is, the quiet was driving him crazy. Back in the city, he'd had action, adrenaline, the feeling of being the guy who caught the bad ones. Out here in Willow Grove, the biggest call was usually a lost dog or somebody's alarm going off by mistake. Caldwell drummed his fingers on the wheel of his patrol cruiser, bored, restless, carrying 2 internal complaints all ready for aggressive stops on black drivers. Complaints that somehow never went anywhere. He spotted the Tesla turning into the driveway, and something in his gut twisted. Expensive car, late hour, black driver in a neighborhood where the census numbers didn't match. In his head, the equation was simple. Doesn't belong. He didn't hit the siren right away. He wanted to watch. He typed the plate into the computer. It came back clean. registered to Jamal T. Kingston. But that name didn't mean anything to Caldwell yet. He saw the driver park near the garage, step out, and start walking toward the side door like he owned the place. Caldwell's mind started filling in the blanks, the way it always did, when the pieces didn't look right to him. Maybe the guy stole the keys. Maybe he was a valet who decided to take a joyride. Maybe, and this thought came easy, he just didn't fit the picture of who should be living in a house like that. Caldwell punched the gas, swung the cruiser across the bottom of the driveway, blocking any exit. He killed the engine, but left the lights spinning, painting the whole front of the mansion in red and blue. Then he stepped out, hand resting on the grip of his service weapon, not drawing it, but close, real close. The flashlight in his other hand snapped on, cutting through the night like a knife, just as Kingston stood there beside his Tesla, one hand still on the door, the other hanging loose at his side. He'd been through this drill before. Not personally, but he'd heard the stories in chambers, read the briefs, ruled on the cases. He knew better than to move quick or reach for anything. He just waited, heart steady, eyes squinting against the glare. Caldwell marched up the incline, boots loud on the concrete. "Stay right there by the vehicle," he barked. His voice echoed off the brick walls. "Let me see those hands." Kingston slowly raised both palms, keeping them open and visible. He could feel the old familiar burn of humiliation rising in his chest. The same burn he thought he'd left behind years ago when he put on the robe. But here it was again, midnight in his own driveway. The officer kept coming closer. "Whose car is this?" Justice Jamal Kingston looked straight into the blinding light, voice calm and deep. The same voice that had commanded courtrooms for decades. "Officer, I live here. This is my home." He stood there, shoulders squared but tired, the weight of 30 years fighting for justice pressing down on him as the flashlight stayed locked on his face and the young cop's sneer started to form. Caldwell's face twisted into a mocking grin the moment those words left the man's mouth. "Live here. Yeah, right, pal. And I'm the president. Keep your hands up high and turn around slow. Face the car." Justice Kingston felt the familiar sting of disbelief rise in his throat, but he kept his movements deliberate and slow, palms still open and visible. He turned toward the Tesla, placing his hands on the cool, glossy roof just as ordered. The humiliation burned hotter now, a slow fire that reminded him of summers back in rural Georgia when he was a teenager, and the local sheriff would pull him over just for walking home from the library with a book under his arm. He pushed the memory down. This wasn't the time. Caldwell stepped in close, boots scraping the driveway, flashlight still blazing. "Don't move. I'm checking you for weapons." His hands started the pat-down, rough and hurried, slapping across the tuxedo jacket like he expected to find a gun instead of a fountain pen. Kingston stayed perfectly still, breathing steady, but inside the old ache from his shoulder injury flared up when the officer yanked his arm back a little too hard. "Officer, my identification is right here in my breast pocket," Kingston said quietly, trying one more time. "If you let me show you—" "Yeah, sure it is." Caldwell cut him off with a snort. "And I bet it says, 'You're the king of this castle. Stop talking and spread your legs wider.'" He kicked lightly at Kingston's ankle to widen his stance, then kept patting down the sides, the legs, even reaching into the jacket without asking. The wallet came out next, flipped open roughly under the flashlight beam. Inside the house, 17-year-old Marcus Kingston had been half asleep on the couch after waiting up for his dad. The ping from the Ring doorbell app snapped him awake. He grabbed his phone and tapped the live feed. What he saw made his stomach drop. His father pressed against their own car, a cop towering over him with lights flashing everywhere. Marcus's fingers flew across the screen. He started recording the whole thing from the app, heart pounding, whispering to himself, "Dad, stay calm. Please stay calm." Out on the wide front porch, Elaine Kingston had heard the cruiser pull up and the raised voice. She stepped outside in her robe, phone already in hand and recording, porch light clicking on automatically. "That's my husband," she called out, voice sharp with worry. "What on earth are you doing?" "He lives here." Caldwell spun halfway around, one hand still on Kingston's back. "Ma'am, get back inside right now and stop filming. That's interfering with police business." Elaine didn't move. Interfering? That's my home and my family. You can't just. Inside. Caldwell barked again, louder this time, turning his full attention back to the man against the car. You see what you started. Now your wife's out here causing problems too. Kingston's jaw tightened. He could feel the rough fabric of the tuxedo bunching under the officer's grip, the cold metal of the Tesla hood pressing into his palms. This young man had no idea who he was dealing with, but that didn't matter right now. What mattered was staying alive and getting through this without giving any excuse for things to get worse. He thought about all the times he'd sat on the bench listening to stories just like this one. Black men pulled over or stopped in their own neighborhoods because someone decided they didn't belong. Tonight it was his turn, and the weight of it settled heavy in his chest. Let me pause right here and talk to you straight. Brothers, the way an old retired lawyer who's seen too many of these cases would, what this officer is doing falls under what we call a Terry stop, named after a Supreme Court case from back in 1968. It means a cop can briefly detain you if there's reasonable suspicion of crime. But it can't be based on a gut feeling or the way you look. Slow driving in your own driveway, that's not enough. And once he starts searching you like this without more reason, he's stepping right over the line into unlawful territory. Here's the practical tip I give every family that walks into my old office. Keep those hands visible. Stay polite but firm, and if you can, calmly ask, "Officer, am I free to go?" That question forces them to decide right then. Don't reach, don't argue loud, but never forget your rights are still yours. I've had clients walk away from situations like this because they knew that one little phrase. Caldwell yanked the wallet completely out now and started flipping through it, muttering under his breath, "Nice suit for a guy who just stole a Tesla. You got any ID in here that ain't fake?" He kept one hand pressed between Kingston's shoulder blades, holding him in place against the car. The flashlight beam danced across the leather, catching the edge of the judicial badge tucked inside, up in the house. Marcus zoomed in on the phone screen, making sure the audio caught every word. His hands were shaking, but he kept recording, whispering into the night. "Come on, Mom. Stay safe." He could see his mother on the porch, phone still up, refusing to back down even as the officer yelled at her again. Elaine took one step forward on the porch, voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "You're making a mistake." "That's Justice Kingston. Check the ID." "He's telling the truth." Caldwell laughed again, short and ugly. "Justice. Lady, the only justice happening here is me doing my job. Now get inside before I have to come up there and deal with you too." He shoved the wallet into his own pocket for the moment and went back to the pat-down. His movements getting rougher, frustration building, because nothing was adding up the way he wanted it to. Kingston closed his eyes for half a second, the old memories flooding back harder now. The dusty roads of his childhood town, the way white officers used to lean in close and say the same things. "You sure this is your bike, boy? Or where'd a kid like you get money for those shoes?" He'd worked his whole life to rise above that, to sit on the highest court in the state and make sure no one else had to feel this same helpless burn. And here it was again, in his own driveway, in the home he and Elaine had built together after years of saving and sacrificing. This young officer is about to learn the hard way that messing with a Supreme Court justice is like playing Russian roulette with your whole career, except every chamber is loaded and the gun is pointed straight at his pension. One wrong move on video and the whole department could be writing checks for years. The distant wail of another siren cut through the night air, growing louder fast. A second set of flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. Then a third cruiser swung around the corner, tires squealing slightly as they raced toward the big brick house. Caldwell straightened up a little, still keeping Kingston pinned against the Tesla, but his voice carried that same stubborn edge when he called out to the approaching cars. "Suspected stolen vehicle here. Driver's uncooperative, and the tags came back to some name that don't match the guy I got." One of the backup officers, a sergeant with 15 years on the force, climbed out of his cruiser and started up the driveway at a jog. His eyes narrowed as the flashlight caught Kingston's face more clearly in the swirling red and blue lights. The sergeant slowed for just a split second, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. But Caldwell kept talking loud and fast. doubling down on his story like it was the only truth that mattered. Got him on a possible grand theft auto. Late night. Expensive ride. Wouldn't show proper ID. I'm not letting this one walk until we sort it out proper. Kingston stayed pressed against the car, hands still flat on the roof, the weight of everything pressing down as the new officers closed in, and the young cop refused to back off even an inch. Sergeant Daniels felt his stomach tighten, the second his flashlight swept across the man's face. 15 years on the force in Willow Grove had taught him to read a scene fast. But nothing prepared him for this one. He slowed his jog up the driveway, boots scraping to a halt a few feet away, and the recognition hit like a punch to the gut. That calm, steady gaze, the salt and pepper beard, the same man who'd sat on the bench 3 months ago during that big suppression hearing where Daniels had testified. Justice Jamal Kingston. Not some joyriding valet, not a thief. Their own state Supreme Court Justice. Kyle, Daniels hissed under his breath, voice low and urgent. Back off right now. That's Justice Kingston. Caldwell froze mid-motion, one cuff already clicking onto Kingston's left wrist. His face went blank for half a second, then flushed red. What? No way. He wouldn't ID himself properly. I ran the plate. You ran the plate and ignored everything else. Daniels snapped, stepping between them. The other backup officer hung back, eyes wide, already sensing the mess they'd walked into. Panic rippled through the small group like a cold wave. Kingston stood tall, the single cuff dangling from his wrist. But he didn't pull away or raise his voice. He just looked at Caldwell with that quiet, measured stare that had silenced courtrooms for years. Officer, Kingston said evenly, you have arrested me. Now finish what you started. Book me exactly like you would any other citizen in this situation. I want every step on the record. Daniels swallowed hard. Sir, we can clear this up at the station. No need for... No. Kingston cut in, firm but controlled. You accused me of stealing my own car. You put your hands on me in my own driveway. Process me. Fingerprint me. Take the photo. Put me in the system. I'm not accepting any special treatment that a 19-year-old kid from the South Side wouldn't get. The words landed heavy. Caldwell's hands shook as he snapped the second cuff into place. Daniels tried one more time, voice dropping to a whisper. Justice, please. This is a rookie mistake. Let's just... Rookie mistake, Kingston repeated softly, eyes locked on Caldwell. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Sergeant, isn't that what you tell folks on the street every single day? The ride to the precinct was silent, except for the crackle of the radio. Kingston sat in the back of the cruiser, wrists locked in front now for the short trip, staring out at the passing streetlights. He thought about Elaine on the porch, and Marcus inside with that phone still recording. He thought about the young black men he'd seen in court over the years, who never got the benefit of the doubt. Tonight, the system was going to treat him the same way it treated them. And he was going to make sure every second of it stayed on paper. At the Oak Creek precinct, the Sallyport door rumbled shut behind them like a heavy curtain coming down. Lieutenant Hayes was already waiting inside, face pale under the fluorescent lights. He'd gotten the call from Daniels on the way over. One look at Kingston in the wrinkled tuxedo, and the lieutenant's shoulders sagged. Justice Kingston, Hayes started, I am so sorry about this. If we can just... Book me, Kingston said again, voice carrying through the concrete garage. Full procedure. No shortcuts. Hayes glanced at Caldwell, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. You heard the justice. Get him through intake. The booking area felt surreal under the harsh lights. Officer Higgins, the veteran at the desk, kept her hands steady as she took Kingston's fingerprints one by one, pressing each digit onto the glass scanner. I'm real sorry. Sir, she murmured. Just doing your job. Officer, Kingston replied kindly. Make sure they're clear. No smudges. Next came the mugshot. Kingston stood against the height chart in his rumpled tuxedo jacket, bow tie still hanging loose. He didn't slump. He didn't look away. He stared straight into the camera, expression steady and dignified, the flash popping bright enough to leave spots in everyone's eyes. That image. Supreme Court Justice in formal wear, handcuffs still on, was now part of the official record. They took his property next. Wallet, fountain pen, handkerchief. Then the order came for the belt and shoelaces. Standard procedure. Caldwell muttered, trying to sound in control, even though his voice cracked. Kingston gave a small, tight smile. Rules are rules. He slipped off the expensive leather belt and pulled the silk laces from his dress shoes, handing them over without a word. The holding cell door clanged open a minute later. Kingston stepped inside, the metal door slamming shut behind him with a finality that echoed off the cinder-block walls. There was one other person in the small cell, a skinny 19-year-old kid in a faded hoodie, hunched on the metal bench like he was trying to disappear. He looked up, eyes wide at the sight of the older man in the fancy clothes. Kingston sat on the opposite end of the bench, smoothing his jacket lapels out of habit. Rough night. Son, the kid nodded slowly. Got picked up for loitering. I was just waiting for the bus after my shift at the diner. Showed the cop my apron and everything. He said I had an attitude. Kingston nodded, the story hitting too close to home. What's your name? Jamal. Well, Jamal. My name's Robert, no. Wait, Jamal too in a way? Call me Kingston. And I think tonight's about to get even more interesting for both of us. Now listen, friends. It's your old retired civil rights lawyer friend stepping in here for a minute. This whole story I'm sharing with you tonight is made up for the sake of teaching, but as someone who's reviewed hundreds of these exact files over the years, these kinds of mix-ups happen to black professionals every single year. We've all seen the headlines. Doctors, lawyers, professors pulled over or stopped in their own neighborhoods because someone decided they didn't look like they belonged. Brothers, it's not ancient history. It's happening right now in cities and suburbs across this country. Let me break it down plain and simple so you can see exactly where things went wrong tonight. What Officer Caldwell did back in that driveway is what we call false arrest and unlawful detention. The Fourth Amendment says a cop needs reasonable suspicion before they can stop you and probable cause before they can arrest you. A black man driving a nice car late at night in a fancy neighborhood, that's not probable cause. That's a hunch based on bias, and the courts have been slapping that down more and more. I've won cases where families got six-figure settlements because a department had a pattern of this exact behavior. And here's the part that always makes me chuckle in a dark way. Qualified immunity. That's the shield cops sometimes hide behind when they mess up. It's supposed to protect them from lawsuits if they didn't clearly violate a right that was already established. But in cases this clear, with body cam and doorbell footage, courts are starting to say not today. Officer, that shield turns into a very expensive souvenir real fast. One federal judge I knew called it the get-out-of-jail-free card that finally got revoked. If this ever happens to you or your son, remember, stay calm, keep your hands visible. Say the magic words, "Am I free to go?" If you can, and get a lawyer on the phone the second you're able. Don't let them rush you through anything. Kingston leaned back against the cold wall, listening to Jamal's story about the bus stop and the attitude charge. He gave the young man quiet advice, the same advice he'd given in courtrooms for decades. Next time, keep your hands where they can see them. Say, "Officer, I'm just waiting for the buses nice and clear, but don't ever let them take your dignity. You still have rights." Even in a moment like this, Jamal looked at him with something close to awe. "You really a judge? Like, for real?" "Supreme Court," Kingston said with a small nod. "And tonight, the system is going to work the way it's supposed to. For both of us." A few minutes later, Kingston stood up and walked to the bars. "Officer," he called out calmly. The jailer hurried over, keys jangling. "Yes, sir? I'm entitled to one phone call. I haven't made it yet." The jailer fumbled with the lock. "Of course. Come with me to the booking desk. You can use the line there." Kingston stepped out of the cell, leaving Jamal staring after him as the heavy door swung shut again and the hallway lights stretched long shadows ahead of them toward the phone. Kingston followed the jailer the short distance to the booking desk, socks sliding quietly on the polished floor, while the fluorescent hum overhead seemed louder than it should. He picked up the heavy black receiver, dialed the private line he knew by heart, and waited through 3 long rings. A sleepy voice finally answered on the other end. "Yeah, who's calling at this hour?" "Charles, it's Jamal," he said, voice steady and low. "I'm speaking to you from inside the Oak Creek Police Department, holding cell. They've arrested me." The governor's groggy tone vanished in an instant. Arrested. Jamal, what the hell happened? Are you okay? Grand Theft Auto. Apparently, Kingston replied dryly. Officer decided a black man in a tuxedo driving a Tesla at midnight in his own driveway must have stolen it. They've got me in cuffs, belt and shoelaces taken. The whole routine. A string of curses came through the line loud enough that half the bullpen froze mid-step. Lieutenant Hayes looked up from his paperwork. Caldwell, still at his desk filling out the report, went sheet white. Every officer within earshot stopped breathing for a second. Robert, I'm calling the commissioner right now, the governor said, voice tight with fury. I'll have you out in 10 minutes flat. This is ridiculous. No, Kingston cut in, sharp and final. You will do no such thing. I want the system to treat me exactly the way it treats every other man who gets pulled in here. Process the paperwork. Take me to arraignment in the morning. I want that young officer to stand in open court and explain under oath why he thought I stole my own car. No quiet release, no backroom deal. Tell the district attorney, I'm not accepting any plea or dismissal. I want this on the public record. The line went quiet for a beat. Jamal, this is going to be a media firestorm. The mayor's going to lose his mind. That's the point. Charles, Kingston said softly, call the DA. Make sure she's there tomorrow. And tell her, no special favors. He hung up the phone with a quiet click that somehow echoed through the entire precinct like a judge's gavel. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Caldwell stared at his computer screen like it had personally betrayed him. Lieutenant Hayes rubbed his temples so hard his fingers left red marks. Even the jailer looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot as he walked Kingston back down the hallway. Back in the cell, Jamal was still sitting on the bench, eyes wide. You really just called the governor? Kingston sat down again, smoothing the wrinkled tuxedo jacket over his knees. I did, and I told him to leave me right here, because if the system only works when the man in cuffs has a title, then it doesn't work at all. He spent the next hour talking quietly with the young man, about rights during stops, about staying calm even when your heart is racing, about how one bad night doesn't have to define the rest of your life. Jamal listened like he was hearing gospel, nodding slowly, asking questions in a small voice. Kingston gave him the same steady advice he'd given countless defendants from the bench. Keep your hands visible, speak clearly, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong. Now let me talk to you straight, brothers, the way only an old retired civil rights lawyer can. What Justice Kingston just did on that phone call is powerful. But here's the part that really matters for the rest of us. This is where 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 comes into play. The federal civil rights law that lets you sue a police officer and the whole department personally when they violate your constitutional rights. I've settled dozens of these cases over the years, and when the facts are this clear, especially with video from the doorbell camera and the body cam, the city doesn't just apologize. They write checks, big ones, 6 figures, sometimes 7, and the best part, qualified immunity, that fancy shield cops sometimes hide behind, starts to crack wide open when the violation is this obvious. Courts look at footage like that and say, nope, you knew better. It's not revenge, folks. It's accountability. And it teaches every department in the state that treating people differently based on skin color is the most expensive mistake they can make. Morning came too fast. By the time the sun hit the precinct windows, someone inside the building, nobody ever admitted who, had leaked the mugshot. There it was on every phone screen across Georgia. Justice Jamal Kingston in his wrinkled tuxedo, bow tie still loose, staring straight into the camera with quiet dignity and steel in his eyes. Within an hour, the image was everywhere. Twitter exploded with the hashtag #JusticeForTheJustice trending at #1. News vans started rolling into the courthouse parking lot before the coffee even finished brewing. Reporters with microphones and satellite trucks crowded the front steps, shouting questions at anyone in a suit who walked by. Inside the holding area, Kingston could hear the commotion building outside, even through the thick walls. He stood up, rolled his shoulders once, and looked over at Jamal. Time to go to court. Son, remember what I told you? Stay strong. The transport van pulled up at the back of the courthouse just after 8. Kingston stepped out in the same tuxedo, still shackled at the wrists and ankles, the metal clinking softly with every step. He could see the swarm of cameras at the front entrance, the flashing lights, the crowd of reporters pushing against the barricades, but his mind was already inside that courtroom, already focused on what came next. He walked steadily toward the side door reserved for defendants, shoulders back, head high, the weight of every black father and son who had ever been through something like this resting on him like a familiar coat. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about making sure the system had to look at itself in the mirror. As they reached the holding area just outside the courtroom, the bailiff opened the door and the roar of the packed gallery spilled out. Kingston stopped for half a second, took a slow breath, and spoke clearly to the deputy beside him. I want the full probable cause hearing. No quick dismissal. I want that officer on the stand under oath. Today. The deputy gave a quick nod and pushed open the heavy oak door to the courtroom. Kingston stepped through, the ankle shackles clinking softly with each measured step, the sound cutting through the low murmur like a warning bell. His formal wear, once sharp and pressed for the gala, was now creased from the long night in the cell, bow tie still hanging loose around his collar. He didn't shuffle or hang his head. He walked straight to the defense table alone, no lawyer beside him, shoulders squared the same way he'd carried them on the bench for 4 years. The packed gallery fell dead silent for one long beat. Then a ripple of gasps and whispers swept through the rows of reporters, activists, and curious locals who had crammed in after the morning news broke. Judge Leonard Pendergast looked up from his notes, eyebrows shooting high behind his glasses. He'd known Kingston for years. They'd disagreed on rulings plenty of times. But seeing him like this, in chains, hit different. The district attorney, Sarah Jenkins, was already on her feet at the prosecution table, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. She cleared her throat twice before speaking. Your Honor, Jenkins began, voice tight. The state moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant immediately. This was clearly a misunderstanding. No need to waste the court's time. Kingston rose slowly, the chains rattling just enough to make every head turn. Objection. Your Honor, he said, calm but carrying to the back row. I do not consent to dismissal. I was accused of a felony by a sworn officer. I was transported here in cuffs. I spent the night in a holding cell. If these charges are dropped now, the public will assume it's only because of who I am. I demand a full probable cause hearing. I want the arresting officer to take the stand under oath and explain his actions. The gallery buzzed louder. Pendergast rubbed his forehead, glancing between the two. Justice Kingston, you're representing yourself here. I am, Kingston replied evenly, and I'm asking the court to proceed exactly as it would for any other citizen standing where I stand today. Pendergast sighed but nodded. Very well. The motion to dismiss is denied for now. The state will present evidence for probable cause. Miss Jenkins, call your witness. Jenkins shot a quick look at the back of the room where Caldwell sat in his dress uniform, face pale and shiny with sweat. The state calls Officer Ryan Caldwell. Caldwell stood up, like his legs had turned to lead. He walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The microphone picked up the slight tremble in his breathing. Jenkins led him through the basics. Name, rank, how long on the force. Then got to the night before. Officer Caldwell, please tell the court why you initiated the stop, she said, keeping her tone flat. Caldwell licked his lips. I was on patrol in Willow Grove. I observed a Tesla moving slowly through the neighborhood late at night. It turned into a driveway of a large home. I ran the plate. It came back to Jamal Kingston. But when I approached, the driver wouldn't show his hands right away. He was uncooperative, kept reaching toward his jacket. I feared for my safety, so I detained him. It looked like a possible stolen vehicle situation. Kingston sat perfectly still at the defense table, listening to every word. The gallery leaned forward. A few reporters scribbled furiously. Jenkins nodded. In your professional opinion, based on your training and experience, did you have reasonable suspicion to believe a crime was in progress? Yes. Ma'am, Caldwell said, sitting up a little straighter now that he was in his story. The time of night, the high-value car, the way the driver was acting. It didn't add up to someone just coming home. I followed procedure for officer safety. Now let me step in here for a second. Brothers, the way an old retired civil rights lawyer who sat through hundreds of these hearings would. What you're hearing right now is the classic officer safety excuse that gets used more times than I can count. Cops are taught to say those three words like a magic shield. I feared for my safety. And suddenly, everything they did becomes reasonable. But here's the truth. The law books don't always spell out in plain English. That excuse only works if there's actual facts backing it up, not a hunch, not he looked like he didn't belong. The Supreme Court has been clear on this for decades, and when an officer sits on that stand and stretches the truth, that's not a little white lie. That's perjury. A felony that can land him in the exact same orange jumpsuit he put other people in. I've seen it happen. One federal case last year involving a judge down in Florida. The department settled for over $2 million after the body cam proved the officer's story didn't match the video. The city wrote the check. The cop lost his badge, and the insurance company still raises rates for every officer in the state. Funny how fast officer safety stops being a free pass once the cameras catch the real story. Caldwell kept going, voice gaining a little confidence. The driver refused to identify himself clearly. He got belligerent when I asked for ID. I had to place him in cuffs to secure the scene until backup arrived. Standard procedure when there's a possible felony in progress. Kingston's eyes never left the young officer. The chains on his wrists rested quietly on the table in front of him. He could feel the weight of every black man who had ever sat in that same spot. Waiting, hoping the system would finally listen, Jenkins finished her questions and sat down fast, like she couldn't wait to get off this ride. Pendergast looked over his glasses. Justice Kingston, do you wish to cross-examine? Kingston stood again, the shackles making that soft, metallic sound as he moved toward the witness stand. I do, Your Honor. He stopped a respectful distance away, voice steady and courtroom strong. Officer Caldwell, you said the vehicle was moving suspiciously slow. Is driving under the speed limit a crime in Georgia? Caldwell shifted in his seat. No, but combined with everything else. Kingston raised a hand gently. And you stated I refused to show my hands. Did your patrol car have a body camera active that night? Caldwell's face went a shade paler. Yes. And did it capture audio as well? Yes. Sir, Kingston turned toward the judge, calm but firm. Your Honor, at this time I would like to introduce defense exhibits. The doorbell camera footage from my home and the body camera video from Officer Caldwell's cruiser. Both were properly subpoenaed this morning. I believe they will clarify exactly what happened in my driveway last night. The courtroom went pin-drop quiet. Every eye locked on the large screen mounted on the wall as the bailiff prepared to play the clips. Kingston stood there, still in his creased formal wear and ankle chains, waiting for the truth to hit the room like a freight train. The big screen flickered to life with a soft, electronic hum that filled the courtroom like a held breath. Kingston remained standing near the witness stand, chains resting lightly against his ankles, eyes fixed on the images that were about to change everything. The first clip started, the Ring doorbell camera from his own front porch, crystal clear in the midnight glow of the porch light. Everyone watched as the Tesla rolled up the driveway at a perfectly normal speed, signal blinking, no swerving, no suspicious moves. Then the cruiser lights exploded across the scene. Caldwell's voice came through loud and sharp. Get on the ground now. But Kingston's hands were already visible, palms open at his sides the entire time. The gallery leaned forward as one. A low murmur rolled through the rows. Next came the body cam footage from Caldwell's own chest. The audio was even sharper. You could hear Kingston's calm baritone plain as day. Officer, I live here. This is my home. Then, crystal clear on the recording, my identification is right here in my breast pocket. Not a single hand went near his pockets after the first command. And right there, under Caldwell's own muttered breath as he slammed the car door, the words slipped out, low but unmistakable. Damn porch monkey thinks he owns the place. Gasps ripped through the courtroom. A woman in the back row covered her mouth. Reporters' fingers flew across laptops. Judge Pendergast's face hardened like stone. Kingston let the silence hang for 3 full seconds before he spoke again. voice steady and cutting. Officer Caldwell, you told this court under oath that I refused to show my hands. The video shows my hands were open and visible from the moment you approached. You said I reached into my jacket after you told me not to. The video shows I never moved my hands from my sides until you grabbed me. You claimed I was belligerent. The video shows I addressed you as officer and told you exactly where my ID was located. So tell me, officer, were you lying to this court? Or did your memory fail you that badly? Caldwell's face drained of color, sweat beaded on his upper lip. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I must have misremembered the exact sequence. Sir, it was dark. I was focused on officer safety. Officer safety, Kingston repeated, the words heavy with quiet thunder. He took one small step closer to the stand, chains whispering against the floor. You saw a black man in a tuxedo getting out of a Tesla in his own driveway and decided the only explanation was crime. You didn't run my name through the system properly. You didn't listen when I told you who I was. You twisted my arm, kicked my legs apart, and put me in handcuffs, all because my skin didn't match the picture in your head. Is that what you call professional judgment? The young officer shrank back in the witness chair, eyes darting to the district attorney like she could save him. She couldn't. The entire room was watching him unravel in real time. Kingston's voice dropped even lower, but every word carried to the last row. This isn't just about me, Officer Caldwell. This is about every black father who gets pulled over on his way home from work. Every black son who gets stopped walking to the corner store. Every black grandfather who simply wants to sit on his own porch without being treated like a suspect. You didn't see a justice last night. You saw a stereotype. And because of that blindness, you felt entitled to strip away my constitutional rights in front of my wife and my teenage son. That is what this video proves. He turned slowly toward Judge Pendergast, still standing tall in his rumpled formal wear and shackles. Your Honor, the defense rests on cross-examination. At this time, I move that all charges against me be dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I move that the full transcript of this hearing, along with both videos, be forwarded immediately to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia for consideration of federal charges against Officer Ryan Caldwell under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. The courtroom erupted. Voices rose in a wave, some outraged, some cheering, reporters scrambling for the doors to file their stories. Judge Pendergast banged his gavel once, twice, 3 times, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. Caldwell sat frozen on the witness stand, staring at the frozen image on the screen. His own face caught mid-sneer, while Kingston's hands remained clearly visible and open. Kingston stood there in the middle of the chaos, chains still on, but his eyes were calm and certain. He had just opened the door to something much bigger than one midnight stop in a driveway, and every person in that room could feel the wind rushing through it. Now listen up, brothers, because your old retired civil rights lawyer friend has seen this exact moment play out more times than I care to count. That body cam and doorbell footage, that's the reason I tell every family who walks through my door to install cameras and keep their phones ready. Once that video is out in the open, no amount of I misremembered or officer safety saves anybody. We're talking federal charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, up to 10 years in prison and a permanent stain on the record. I've watched tough cops turn pale when they realize the same law they swore to uphold is now coming for them. And the beautiful part, the city's insurance company starts sweating bullets because those settlement checks come straight out of taxpayer pockets. One judge I knew called it the great equalizer. Cameras don't care what color your badge is. Caldwell finally found his voice, a weak croak that barely carried past the first row. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Kingston didn't even turn around. He simply looked at the judge and waited, the weight of 30 years on the bench behind every quiet breath he took. Pendergast stared at the screen for a long moment, then back at the young officer, who had just crumbled in front of the entire state of Georgia. The gavel came down one final time. Motion granted on dismissal with prejudice, he said, voice heavy, Clerk will prepare the transcript and forward it as requested. Officer Caldwell, you are excused, for now. Caldwell stood on legs that looked ready to give out, uniform suddenly hanging loose on his shoulders, and walked toward the side door like a man heading to his own funeral. Kingston watched him go, the fire of old battles still burning steady in his chest, knowing the real fight had only just begun. Caldwell barely made it 10 steps down the polished courthouse hallway before 2 internal affairs detectives stepped out of an alcove and blocked his path. The plastic evidence bin they held out felt like a coffin for everything he'd ever wanted to be. Badge, gun, and department ID, the lead detective said, without raising his voice. You're suspended without pay right now. Caldwell, full investigation starts today. Don't make this harder than it already is. His fingers moved like they belonged to a stranger, unclipping the shield he'd polished every morning, sliding the Glock from its holster, dropping both into the bin with a dull clack that seemed louder than the courtroom chaos he'd just left behind. He didn't argue. The videos were already everywhere. Arguing would only make the headlines worse. By the time he reached the parking lot, his phone was blowing up. Missed calls from the chief, texts from the union rep saying we'll fight this, and one single message from Sarah that stopped him cold in his tracks. Don't come home. My sister's picking me up. I can't do this anymore. Ryan, everyone is watching. He read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring as his eyes stung. The woman who had moved to the suburbs with him for a quieter life, who had begged him to leave the city precinct because she wanted them to start a family someday. That woman was gone. He sat in his truck for 20 minutes with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel until his vision swam. 3 days later, the chief made it official in a short press release. Officer Ryan Caldwell terminated for conduct unbecoming. Pending criminal charges, the union rep met him at a coffee shop on the edge of town, sliding a folder across the table with a tired shrug. I'm sorry. The body cam is ironclad. Even the union can't spin this one. You're on your own for the criminal side. Caldwell stared at the folder like it was written in a language he no longer understood. Meanwhile, the department was taking heavy fire of its own. Kingston's civil rights attorney filed a federal Section 1983 lawsuit the very next week, naming Caldwell personally and the entire Willow Grove Police Department. The complaint was blunt: pattern of discriminatory stops, failure to train on implicit bias, and deliberate indifference to constitutional rights. Within a month, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a full pattern or practice investigation into the department, door-to-door interviews with every officer, review of every traffic stop for the past 3 years. The works. The city council held emergency meetings. The mayor looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Taxpayers were already bracing for the kind of settlement that empties rainy day funds. Now let me tell you something, straight from an old retired civil rights lawyer who's watched departments try to dodge these bullets for decades. When a case like this hits federal court under Section 1983, the city doesn't just say oops and move on. They cut big checks. 6 figures, sometimes 7, because juries hear the word Supreme Court Justice, and suddenly every black father in the county starts nodding along. And the DOJ investigation, that's the part that really stings. They can force the whole department into years of oversight, new training, body cams that actually work, the whole 9 yards. I've seen tough police chiefs turn pale when the feds show up with subpoenas. Funny how fast We're a Family turns into every man for himself when the checks start getting written. 6 months crawled by like a slow-motion nightmare. Caldwell's days blurred together in a cheap efficiency apartment off the interstate. Job applications that went nowhere. Nights staring at the ceiling, replaying that driveway over and over. His mother still called every Sunday, but even her voice had changed, like she was talking to a stranger wearing her son's face. Then the criminal trial started. State of Georgia versus Ryan Caldwell. Perjury, official misconduct, and deprivation of civil rights. The same courtroom, but this time the gallery was packed with national media, civil rights leaders, and families who had driven hours just to be there. Caldwell sat at the defense table in a cheap gray suit his mother had bought him, looking smaller than he ever had in uniform. No badge, no gun, just a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. The prosecutor didn't waste time. She played the videos again, this time for a jury of 12 ordinary Georgians who had seen the headlines for months. The ring footage, the body cam, that muttered slur caught on audio. The courtroom stayed silent except for the occasional sharp intake of breath. When Kingston took the stand as the star witness, every juror sat up straighter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What hurt most wasn't the handcuffs, he said quietly, looking straight at Caldwell. It was the moment I realized my own son was watching his father get treated like a criminal in our own driveway. Officer Caldwell didn't see a judge that night. He saw a threat because of the color of my skin. And if he could do that to me, imagine what he's done to young men who don't have a title or a platform. Caldwell's defense attorney tried the usual script. Heat of the moment. Officer safety. Honest mistake. But when Caldwell himself took the stand, the words wouldn't come out right. The prosecutor asked one simple question. Officer Caldwell, looking back at that video now, do you still believe your actions were justified? He stared at his hands for a long moment. The same hands that had snapped those cuffs on. His voice cracked when he finally answered. No, I saw what I wanted to see. I let my own assumptions take over. I didn't see a man coming home. I saw a stereotype, and I'm sorry for that. I'm so damn sorry. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they filed back in, the foreman stood, cleared his throat, and read the verdict in a steady voice that carried to every corner of the room. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ryan Caldwell, guilty on count 1, perjury, guilty on count 2, official misconduct, guilty on count 3, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Caldwell closed his eyes, the courtroom tilting around him as the words landed like final nails in a coffin he had built himself. The gavel came down somewhere far away, and all he could hear was the slow, steady beat of his own heart, counting down the years he had just lost. Weeks later, the same courtroom felt smaller, heavier, like the walls had moved in overnight. Caldwell stood at the defense table in that same cheap gray suit, hands clasped so tight his knuckles showed white. Judge Pendergast looked down from the bench, voice steady, but carrying the weight of every headline the case had generated. Ryan Caldwell, you betrayed more than a badge that night. You betrayed the public trust and the very oath you swore to uphold. The sentence of this court is 7 years in the state penitentiary. The words landed clean and final. No probation, no suspended time. Caldwell didn't flinch outwardly, but inside something cracked, wide open. The bailiffs moved in quietly, cuffs clicking around his wrists again. This time for real, for years. As they led him out the side door, he caught one last glimpse of Kingston sitting in the front row, not smiling, not triumphant, just watching with that same quiet steadiness that had started everything. The civil suit wrapped up even faster. Kingston's lawyers and the city reached a settlement before the ink on the verdict was dry. $2.8 million paid to Kingston and his family. The department agreed to 3 years of federal oversight, mandatory bias training, and a complete overhaul of how they handled traffic stops in neighborhoods like Willow Grove. The mayor called it a painful but necessary step forward. Taxpayers called it the most expensive driveway mistake in Georgia history. And somewhere in a quiet office downtown, the insurance adjusters shook their heads and raised rates for every police department in the state. 3 years passed. Like sand through an hourglass, nobody wanted to flip. The visitation room at the State Correctional Center smelled of floor wax and old coffee. Caldwell sat on one side of the scratched plexiglass, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds and gained a few new scars. 30 years old now, but the lines around his eyes made him look closer to 40. His hair was thinner. The swagger that once filled a uniform was long gone. He was waiting for his mother. She was the only one who still came. But today the door opened, and a different man walked in. Justice Jamal Kingston took the seat opposite him, dressed in a simple navy sweater and slacks. No robe, no title on display. Just a man who had chosen to drive 2 hours on a Saturday morning. Caldwell stared, frozen, half expecting security to rush in and drag the justice back out. Instead, Kingston simply nodded, picked up the phone on his side, and waited. Caldwell lifted his own receiver with hands that still shook sometimes. "Why are you here?" Kingston's voice came through clear and calm. I wanted to see how the system finished what it started. And I wanted to give you something. He reached into the small bag allowed for visitors and slid a thick hardcover book through the narrow slot at the bottom of the partition. Constitutional Law, Principles and Liberties, the same textbook Kingston had used in his own classes years ago. Caldwell stared at the cover like it might burn him. You want me to read law? After everything, I want you to use what you know, Kingston said quietly. You've got 4 years left. You can spend them angry, fighting, and letting this place finish breaking you. Or you can learn how the system really works. The good parts and the broken ones. A lot of men in here never had a fair shot. They had officers who did exactly what you did that night, but without cameras to catch it. You know how reports get written. You know how testimony gets shaped. That knowledge could help them file proper appeals. You could make a difference from the inside. Caldwell turned the book over in his hands, thumb tracing the spine. His eyes filled, but he blinked it back. I took everything from you that night. Your dignity, your night with your family, almost your freedom, and you're sitting here offering me a textbook. Kingston leaned closer to the glass. Nobody won, Ryan. You lost years of your life. I lost something harder to name. Faith that the uniform still meant protection for everyone. The city lost a young officer who might have become something better if he hadn't been blinded by old fears. But the scales can still balance if someone starts paying the debt forward. You owe a debt. Start paying it. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the visitation room and the distant clank of doors. Caldwell looked at the book, then back at the man he had once pressed against a Tesla in a driveway. I don't know if I can. You don't have to know today, Kingston said, standing slowly. Just read page 1 when you get back to your cell. The rest will come. He turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the book and the offer sitting between them like a second chance wrapped in plain paper. Caldwell stayed seated long after the door closed, fingers resting on the textbook, like it was the only solid thing left in his world. Now let me talk to you one last time, brothers, the way an old retired civil rights lawyer who's fought these battles for 35 years wants to leave you thinking. The law isn't some perfect machine that always gets it right. Sometimes it needs a good hard shove from regular people who refuse to look away. But when that shove comes, when good folks demand the system work for every single one of us, it can still surprise you in the best way. Know your rights, keep your hands visible, stay calm if you possibly can, and never, ever stop holding the people with badges accountable, because the next driveway stop might be yours, or your son's, or your grandson's, and when that blue light hits the rear view, you'll want the law on your side, the same way Justice Kingston made sure it worked that night. So tell me, right now in the comments, did justice get served here? Or did it go too far? Has anyone in your family ever been profiled like that? Drop the city you're watching from. Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, Birmingham, Detroit, wherever you are. Hit subscribe so you never miss these real talk stories that actually teach you the law while you're watching. Share this one with a young man who needs to hear it. I read every single comment, and I answer as many as I can. Stay safe out there, brothers. Keep your heads up, keep your cameras ready, and remember, the law belongs to all of us, not just the ones wearing the badge. I'll see you in the next one.